There is no question that prepositions in English, words such as in, on, and at, are prepositions of place, are a constant source of frustration. It's so easy to make mistakes using these prepositions because we don't have strict rules. Rather, we have these general patterns that we use that can be difficult to remember and use accurately. And today, I want to change all of that. If you don't already know, I'm Anne-Marie with Speak Confident English. Everything I do is designed to help you get the confidence you want for your life and work in English. One way I do that is with these weekly Confident English lessons where I share fluency and confidence building strategies, advanced level vocabulary, and in-depth grammar training, like I'm doing in this lesson today. So while you're here, make sure that you subscribe to my Speak Confident English channel so you never miss one of these lessons. To help ease this frustration of not knowing which preposition to use, I want to share with you 4 simple visual patterns that you can easily picture in your mind so that you're certain to make the right choice when using in, on, or at in English. Along the way, as I share these visual patterns, I will also share multiple examples to reinforce what you're learning. And at the end, I have a tip for how you can remember all of this easily and a quiz as well. Let's start right away with visual strategy number 1. I want you to visualize a map. Imagine looking at a map of the United States, for example. You're looking at the entire country. And then you might start to zero in on a specific state and then a city. And then perhaps you start looking at the streets and eventually a specific address. When you're determining your preposition of place, again, in, at, or on, we can use this same visual concept to help us. Here's the general pattern you can follow. The more general or least specific the location is, such as a country, a city, a town, we use the preposition in. For example, the office is located in Toronto. Then, from there, we start to zero in or narrow our focus to the next level, and we start to see specific streets or even islands. And at that level, we use the preposition on. The office is on Olive Street. It's far more specific than simply saying it's somewhere in Toronto. And then finally, we zero in a little bit more to the most specific as possible. We focus on an address. And for that, we might say the office is located at 33 Olive Street. Each level of specificity helps us determine which preposition to use. And here's a little pro tip. We can use this same visual concept when we're determining whether to use arrive in, arrive at, or arrive on. For example, if you've come to a specific place, such as an airport, you would say, we've arrived at the airport. If you've come to a general place, such as a country or a state, we use in. They've just arrived in France. And lastly, just like maybe identifying the street or the island, if you've come to the specific side of something, we would use on. For example, we've just arrived on the left side of the parking garage. Before we look at visual strategy number 2, let's do a quick quiz. Which preposition would you use in this sentence? Our colleagues, Sydney, will be online for the meeting. What do you think we need here? If you recall, at that top level, when we're looking at countries, states, and cities, the least specific location, we use in. Our colleagues in Sydney will be online for the meeting. Visual strategy number 2, we use the preposition of place in when talking about containers, borders, and limits. Containers can range from pockets to boxes. For example, you might tell your daughter, your colored pencils are in the basket, or in your bag, in the box. Each one of those is a kind of container. We also use in to describe that something or someone is enclosed within the borders of an area. For example, you might be remembering a road trip that you took and telling a colleague a story from that road trip. And while doing so, you could say, "We were driving in the northern region when we realized we were headed the wrong way." A region is an area with borders. So when you are enclosed within those borders, we use the preposition in. That particular example also reinforces strategy number 1, visualizing a map. When we talk about a region, we're talking about a non-specific place. So once again, the preposition in is our best choice. We follow this same pattern when describing that something or someone is underwater. For example, maybe later today, you and your kids are going swimming in the lake. And now, visual strategy number 3. Use the preposition on when talking about surfaces, public transportation, and devices. Before we talk about it, I want you to really visualize that. Visualize the surface of a desk. Visualize public transportation. Visualize a device. Let's start with talking about surfaces. Whether a surface is vertical or horizontal, we use the preposition on. For example, at a museum, you might say, "Take a look at the painting on the wall. It's breathtaking." The wall is a vertical surface, and the placement of the painting is on the wall. This same rule applies when we talk about where apartments might be inside a building. If we think about each floor of a building as being a surface. If you want to specify the exact location, the exact floor that someone lives on, you would say, "Her apartment is on the 5th floor." If we wanted to go further and add more specificity, we could do it by saying, "I think she lives on the 5th floor in apartment 403. We use in because with the apartment number, we are the most specific. Now, let's continue on from surfaces and talk about devices. When we're referring to things that exist through devices or technology, for example, computers, smartphones, the internet, TV, and so on, we use the preposition on. For example, let's say that while driving your car, your favorite song from your childhood starts playing, and you might say, "I never thought I would hear this song on the radio again." Similarly, when someone talks about a documentary they saw on the internet, we would say, "I watched a fantastic documentary on Netflix over the weekend." In this example, Netflix exists as an online form of television, so we adapt on TV to on Netflix. The third visual category for using on is public transportation. This includes trains, buses, and planes. If you regularly commute to work by train, you might sometimes call a coworker and say, "I've been stuck on the train for the last 30 minutes, and I'm going to be late for work." Or perhaps while commuting to work, you might realize you forgot something and say, "Oh, I accidentally left the file on the train." Now, I'm going to throw a curveball at you. In other words, I'm going to share with you something that's difficult or unexpected. You might already be thinking about it. You know that we say on a train, on a plane, on a bus. So why don't we say on a car? Instead, we say in a car. A car is a form of transport, isn't it? That is certainly true. A car is a form of transport, but I want you to stop and think about something for a moment. I want you to think about how you feel on a plane, train, or bus versus a car? I know that's a strange question, but stick with me. With each of those modes of transport, how much freedom of movement do you feel that you have? How enclosed do you feel? Enclosed means to be surrounded on all sides. A car limits or restricts our freedom of movement. You can't stand up and walk around a car in the same way that you can on a bus, train, or plane. Your freedom of movement is restricted. Remember we talked about using in when we talk about containers or being enclosed within a boundary or a limit. A car encloses us. So when we're thinking about different modes of transportation, we want to think about how much freedom of movement we have. This is why you might describe your daughter as being outside on her skateboard or outside on her bicycle. There's freedom of movement when we're using those modes of transportation. But if your husband is looking for a pair of sunglasses, you might ask him, have you checked in the car, or have you looked for your sunglasses in the car? We're using in because it's enclosed. If I were to say, have you checked on the car, then I'm talking about the surface of the car. I might be talking about the roof of the car. Here's one last example when we're talking about these modes of transport and how enclosed we are or how restricted our movement might be. If you've ever been on a cruise, then you definitely spent a lot of time on the boat where you had freedom of movement. You could walk around easily. And you also spent a lot of time in your cabin. That's the room that you had on the boat. You're more restricted inside that cabin and you're enclosed. And now it's time for visual strategy number 4. Use at for a point, a specific point or location, a place of purpose, and events. Let's look at several examples. In strategy number 1, our visual map, we highlighted that we use at for those specific locations, such as an address or an intersection. And we can continue with that idea using at when we want to pinpoint a specific spot in a location. For example, a specific spot might be at the top or at the bottom. For example, if you visit a library and you're looking for a specific book, the librarian might say, you'll find it at the end on the bottom shelf. If the librarian had simply said, you'll find it on the bottom shelf, you would have to spend a lot more time going through every book to find it. But she's pinpointing a specific location at the end on the bottom shelf. Now, in that example, you might have also noticed that I said when you're at the library or if you're at the library. Whenever a place of purpose is mentioned, we use the preposition at. A place of purpose is any place or building that has been created in order to perform an action. That includes schools, libraries, offices, gyms, car washes, and so on. If you receive a text message from your partner asking, "Where are you?" you might say, "I'm at the car wash. I'll be home soon." At a car wash, there is a specific action you are performing. There's a purpose for that location. And lastly, we use the preposition of place at for events. For examples, weddings, graduations, galas, and so on. For example, your sister might be telling you about her best friend's wedding, and she'll say, "At the wedding, everyone was impressed with the food." Before I quiz you on your preposition of place know-how, I want to give you a tip on how to remember all of this. Yes, these are visual strategies to help you easily picture them when you're deciding which preposition of place to use. But in a natural conversation, we don't always have time to stop, visualize, think about where this is on the visual map, and then continue the conversation after we've made a choice. Instead, we want this to become automatic. What I recommend is that you build on the examples I've given you in this lesson for each of the 4 visual strategies we've highlighted. If you have a place where you keep all of your notes and vocabulary that you're learning in English, you could create a list for each visual strategy that we've talked about and add your own example sentences. Add as many as you want or as many as you can think of. And then spend a few minutes a day reading those, saying those sentences out loud. And when I say a few minutes, I mean just 3 or 4 minutes. It doesn't have to be a long practice. But just take time every day to read those sentences out loud. Doing this means you're not only seeing the sentences, but you're actually using them. You're speaking them aloud, and you're hearing yourself say them. This is giving you repeated practice over a period of time, in other words, consistent practice, so that you start to remember them. They become locked in your memory. I want you to think for a moment about your childhood. You might remember telephones before the smartphone. Of course, now all of us have every phone number saved in our smartphone, and we don't have to remember any of them. I'm not even sure if I remember my current phone number right now. But I can tell you my childhood phone number. I can say it in a heartbeat. When we were kids and we had to dial someone's phone number, most of us memorized our home phone, the phone number of our best friend, maybe phone numbers of relatives, and several others. We had all of those numbers locked in our memory, and it was so easy to remember them because we said them and we dialed them again and again and again. We had that repeated practice. So it was simple to remember those numbers. The same is true with these prepositions. If you allow yourself to have that consistent practice over time, you will lock in these strategies, these visual strategies, and be able to use them automatically. So now that you have all of that, now that we have these 4 visual strategies to help you determine which preposition of place to use, and you've got a tip for how to remember them, let's do a quick quiz. I have 5 sentences, and I want you to decide which preposition of place to use in each one. Number 1, my daughter is vacationing Cancun at the moment. If you said in Cancun, you're exactly right. Let's think back to visual strategy number 1, visualizing a map. And that first level, that broad overview, included countries, states, and cities. My daughter is vacationing in Cancun at the moment. Sentence number 2, take a look at the cells, the right side of the screen. What do you think? Once again, when we talked about that visual map, we talked about the second level that included streets, islands, and sides. We talked about being on the left side of the parking garage. And here we're talking about on the right side of the computer screen. If you imagine an Excel file, you might ask someone to take a look at the cells on the right side of the screen. Sentence number 3, have you been watching The Queen's Gambit? Netflix. Hopefully you remember the example we had earlier when talking about devices and technology, including television, and we highlighted that Netflix is an online version of television, and for all of those we use on. Have you been watching The Queen's Gambit on Netflix? Sentence number 4. We are debating whether we need all our staff to be the office. When we talk about the office, we're talking about a place of purpose. So at is the best choice. We are debating whether we need all our staff to be at the office. And now, sentence number 5. The class is the end of the hallway, the left. What do you think? The class is at the end of the hallway on the left. At the end of a hallway is at a specific point, just like that example of the librarian saying the book is at the end on the bottom shelf. And On the left is talking about which side. On the left side. And with that, you have 4 visual strategies to help you remember which preposition to use when you're deciding between in, at, and on. You also have my tip for how to remember all of this. If you want to see these examples that I've shared with you easily, I recommend that you visit this lesson on my website and then follow my strategy to help you remember these patterns. Thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you next time.